The market was full of noise. Creatures from many worlds walked past, carrying baskets, bags, and glowing jars of food. The air was heavy with the smell of roasted meat, fried roots, and hot spices. Traders shouted loudly, calling buyers to their stalls. Everyone seemed busy. Everyone seemed alive. But in the middle of all that movement, one figure stood still. She was thin, her skin pale and tired, her clothes torn and dusty. She was not human. Her eyes were larger than human eyes, glowing faintly in the shadows, but the glow was weak, almost dying. Her shoulders were bent forward, her arms wrapped around her empty stomach. She was a widow from a faraway star, and she was hungry. For days she had searched for food. For days she had hoped someone would show kindness, but the crowd never looked at her. Traders turned their faces away. Children laughed and ran past her without noticing her hollow cheeks. To them, she was only another broken alien, another beggar in the cold streets of the human colony. Once, she had a mate. He had been strong, brave, and full of dreams. Together they had built a small home on their planet, with hopes for children, laughter, and peace. But war had come. The fire of conflict had taken everything. Her mate, her home, and her future. She was left alone and starving. Her stomach growled again, loud and painful. She pressed her hand against it, as if she could silence the hunger. She looked at the stalls. A man was selling hot bread, the steam rising into the air. A woman cut slices of fruit, sweet juice dripping from her knife. The smell made her mouth water, but she could not move closer. She had no money, no strength, and no hope. Her eyes began to blur with tears. She thought, is this how it ends? Forgotten in a place full of food? Invisible in a world of humans? She almost laughed at the cruel joke of fate. Her people had once been proud, but now she was just a shadow. A cold wind passed through the street. She shivered, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The sky above was gray, the sun hidden. The crowd moved like a river, fast and without care, and she felt herself drowning in silence, in hunger, in loneliness. Then something unusual happened. She heard a small voice. A child's voice. Are you hungry? The widow blinked. She looked down. At first she thought it was a trick of her tired eyes. But no, it was real. A little human girl stood in front of her. Her hair was messy, tied into 2 uneven braids. Her clothes were simple, but her face carried warmth. In her tiny hands she held a piece of bread, half-eaten, still warm. The widow froze. She did not know what to say. She had never heard those words directed at her. Are you hungry? The little girl tilted her head, waiting for an answer. You look sad, she said softly. And hungry. You can have this. She stretched out the bread with both hands, her small arms trembling a little. The widow's heart beat faster. She felt shame. How could she take food from a child? But her body screamed for it. Her lips trembled. She whispered in a low, broken voice, I cannot. But the girl only smiled. It's okay. Daddy always says sharing makes hearts warm. The widow's eyes filled with tears. Slowly, with shaking hands, she took the bread. She bit into it carefully as if afraid it would vanish. The taste filled her mouth, soft, warm, full of life. For the first time in many days, she felt strength return, even if just a little. Thank you, she whispered, her voice almost too quiet to hear. The little girl smiled wider. She stepped closer and whispered something that made the widow's heart stop. If you marry my dad, you can eat warm food every day. The widow froze. She stared at the child, unable to believe what she had heard. Marry her dad? Was this some innocent game? Was this child simply being kind? The girl giggled, as if she had told the simplest truth in the world. Daddy is good, he cooks. He's lonely too. You should marry him. The widow could not answer. Her chest felt heavy, her breath uneven. For years no one had spoken to her with such honesty. No one had even seen her. And now, a little human girl looked at her not as a beggar, not as a stranger, but as someone who could belong. Her hands tightened around the piece of bread. The market noise faded into the distance. For a moment it was only her and the girl. And for the first time since she lost everything, hope flickered inside her heart. The bread in her hand was warm, but the alien widow's heart was warmer. She had expected the crowd to keep ignoring her as always. Yet here she was, standing in front of a small human girl whose kindness cut through the noise of the busy marketplace. The little girl did not look afraid. She did not see the sharp lines of the widow's alien face or the faint glow in her tired eyes as something strange or dangerous. She only saw someone who was hungry, someone who needed help. The widow studied her. The child's cheeks were red from the cold, and her boots were scuffed as if she had run through the streets many times before. There was no fear, only honesty. For years, the widow had lived unseen, a shadow in the corner. Now this little girl's gaze was like sunlight, bright, warm, and impossible to escape. Why are you giving this to me? The widow asked. Her voice cracked, thin from hunger and from years of silence. The girl shrugged in the way only children can. Because you need it more. I already ate. She pointed at her small belly and giggled. See, full. The widow almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat. Her lips trembled. She had forgotten how laughter felt. She wanted to tell the child that kindness like this was dangerous, that humans and aliens did not always mix, that her father might be angry if he knew. But the girl's eyes glowed with so much innocence, so much truth, that all those words died before reaching her mouth. The child leaned closer, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. You shouldn't be alone. My daddy says no one should be alone. The widow's chest ached. She remembered her mate's last words, whispered during the war. Stay alive, even if I don't. And yet she had barely managed. Alone, starved, empty. But this small human was saying the same thing, that life should not be lived in loneliness. The girl held out her hand, small fingers reaching for the widow's larger ones. Come with me. Daddy will give you more food. The widow pulled back slightly, alarmed. No, I cannot. I don't belong. Your father would not want me near. The girl tilted her head, confused. Why not? You're nice. You said thank you. That means you're good. The simplicity of those words cut deeper than any blade. The widow shook her head. She was not good. She was broken, unwanted, a widow without a home. Yet to this child, one word of gratitude was enough proof of goodness. The crowd bustled around them, voices shouting, coins clinking, boots striking stone. Yet to the widow, all of it faded away. The only sound that mattered was the girl's soft voice. Daddy makes soup, the girl whispered with excitement. It's warm and smells nice. If you marry him, you can eat soup every day. The widow's eyes widened. She felt the bread almost slip from her fingers. Marry? The word echoed in her mind like thunder. She stared at the child, her mouth opening but no words coming out. The girl giggled again, proud of her idea. It's true. Daddy is lonely. He cooks, he works, but he's always sad. If you marry him, you won't be hungry. And Daddy won't be sad. Then we'll all be happy. The widow's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to explain that things were not that simple, that humans would never accept someone like her into their homes. But the little girl's innocence made explanations feel empty. What was complicated for adults was simple for a child. Lonely hearts should not stay lonely. Child. The widow whispered, her voice trembling. You do not understand what you are saying. But the girl just smiled wider. I understand. You're hungry. Daddy is kind. He can be your husband. Then you'll be family. The widow's eyes burned with tears she could no longer hide. Family. That word was a knife and a gift at the same time. She remembered her lost family, her mate's gentle hands, the laughter that had once filled her home. All gone. And now this little stranger offered the impossible, a chance to belong again. The girl's hand tugged at her shawl. Please come. Daddy is waiting. The widow looked at the bread in her hand, then at the child's hopeful face. Every part of her screamed to run, to disappear before rejection crushed her fragile hope. But her legs refused to move. Instead, she nodded slowly. The little girl's face lit up with joy. She grabbed the widow's hand tightly and began pulling her through the crowd. People turned their heads, some whispering, some frowning. A human child holding the hand of an alien widow was not something they saw every day. The widow felt her heart pound with fear and confusion. She whispered to herself, "What am I doing?" But deep inside, a small, fragile flame of hope had been lit. As they turned a corner, the widow saw him. A tall human man standing near the edge of the marketplace carrying a bag of supplies. His dark hair was messy, his coat patched, his eyes tired but watchful. The little girl shouted happily, "Daddy!" The man's eyes lifted, landing on his daughter first, and then on the alien woman holding her hand. His expression changed, hard and cautious. He froze. The widow felt her stomach drop. She wanted to pull away, to escape before his anger burned her. But the little girl squeezed her hand and whispered, "Don't worry. Daddy is nice." The widow could not breathe. The kindness of the girl had led her here, but now she would learn if humans truly had kindness in their hearts, or if this small hope would be crushed forever. The alien widow's heart thudded painfully in her chest as the little girl pulled her closer to the tall man. He stood at the edge of the market, one arm holding a heavy bag of vegetables, the other hand gripping a loaf of bread. His coat was patched in places, his boots worn from long work. His face looked tired, lined with worry, but his eyes were sharp, watchful like someone who had learned to protect more than just himself. "Daddy," the little girl shouted, her small boots thumping against the stone street. "Look who I found." The man's gaze shifted from his daughter to the stranger beside her. The widow froze under his eyes. She felt them cut through her, measuring, judging. She wanted to let go of the girl's hand, to run back into the shadows before the father's expression turned colder. But the little girl didn't let go. She tugged on the widow's arm proudly, as if showing her father a treasure. "She was hungry, Daddy," the child explained, her voice bright and innocent. "So I gave her bread. Can she come with us, please?" The father didn't answer. He looked at the alien woman closely, his jaw tight. The widow lowered her eyes in shame. She knew what he saw. Her thin body, her ragged clothes, the faint glow in her alien eyes that made humans uneasy. She had seen this look before, the look that said, "You don't belong here." "I didn't ask her name yet," the girl went on, oblivious to the silence. "But she's nice. She said thank you and—" The child's face lit up with mischief. "I told her she should marry you." The words struck the widow like lightning. Her chest burned with embarrassment. She wanted to vanish into the ground. Her hands trembled around the half piece of bread still clutched in her palm. The man's eyes narrowed, his voice steady but deep. "Lena." The girl looked up at him, smiling. "Yes, Daddy." The man sighed, setting the heavy bag down on the ground. His shoulders straightened and he stepped closer. The widow instinctively stepped back, afraid of his closeness, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold his daughter in anger. Instead, he crouched down to her level. "Lena," he said gently, "you can't ask strangers to marry me." "That's not how things work," the little girl pouted, folding her arms. "Why not?" "She's lonely." "You're lonely. It makes sense." The father shook his head, half in disbelief, half in sadness. "It's not that simple." The widow's throat felt tight. She wanted to whisper an apology, to explain that she hadn't encouraged this, but her voice refused to leave her. She only stood, silent and trembling, ready for him to send her away. Then, to her surprise, the man's gaze turned back to her. "Not cold, not cruel, just careful. Are you hungry?" he asked simply. The question stunned her. Her eyes widened. For a moment she thought she had imagined it. Then she saw his face, serious but not unkind. She swallowed hard. Her voice came out in a whisper, fragile. "Yes," the man nodded slowly. He picked up his bag and stood again. "Then you'll come eat with us." The widow blinked, shocked. Her body stiffened in disbelief. Eat with them? She couldn't understand. Humans didn't invite strangers like her into their homes, but the little girl clapped her hands, delighted. "See, I told you he's nice." She tugged harder on the widow's arm. "Come on." The widow felt her legs move even though fear screamed inside her. Every step toward him felt like walking into unknown danger, but also strangely like walking toward warmth she hadn't felt in years. The man walked in silence, leading them through narrow streets toward the edge of the colony. The widow kept her head low, but she could feel eyes watching. Humans glanced at her with suspicion, some with outright dislike. She was an alien among them, and worse, walking beside a human man and his child. She braced for whispers, for stones, for someone to shout, but none came. Only the silent weight of stairs pressing against her back. Finally, they reached a small house with a crooked roof and a wooden door that creaked when the man pushed it open. The warmth of firelight spilled out, carrying with it the faint smell of stew. The widow froze at the doorway. Her feet refused to cross. This wasn't her world. She didn't belong here, but the man looked back at her, his eyes steady. "It's just food," he said quietly, as if he could read her fear. "Nothing more." The little girl tugged again. "Come in, Daddy makes the best soup." The widow's heart pounded. She stepped inside. The warmth of the small home wrapped around her like a blanket. For the first time in years, she wasn't outside in the cold, invisible and forgotten. She was inside, standing in the glow of a fire, with a child smiling at her and a man who hadn't turned her away. For the first time, Hope didn't feel like a dream. The widow stood just inside the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the small home. It was nothing like the grand homes of her people long ago. The walls were made of wood, patched in places with scraps of metal. A single fire burned in the hearth, filling the room with soft warmth. On the table, a pot of stew released steam into the air, carrying the rich smell of spices and vegetables. She had almost forgotten what home smelled like. The little girl skipped forward, dropping her small boots by the door and running straight to the table. "Daddy, is it ready? Can we eat now?" The father set the heavy bag of supplies on the counter with a quiet thud. He nodded, his face serious as always, though his eyes softened slightly at his daughter's excitement. "It's ready. Sit down." The girl quickly climbed into a chair, her small legs swinging under the table. Then she looked back at the widow, who still stood frozen near the door. "Come on," she called. "You can sit here next to me." The widow hesitated. Her hands gripped the edges of her torn shawl, pulling it tighter around her thin shoulders. She wanted to run. This wasn't her place. Humans had their own families, their own rules. She was a stranger, worse, an alien widow, the kind most humans avoided. But the smell of the stew was too strong. Her stomach twisted painfully, reminding her of her weakness. She swallowed hard and slowly stepped forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. The man watched her silently. His eyes weren't cruel, but they weren't entirely trusting either. He seemed to study every move she made, as though deciding whether she was a danger or simply a broken soul. The widow lowered herself into the chair beside the little girl. She kept her head bowed, afraid to meet the man's gaze. The table between them felt like a wall. The man ladled the stew into 3 bowls. Steam rose, carrying the scent of carrots, beans, and herbs. He placed one bowl in front of his daughter, one in front of the widow, and the last before himself. "Eat," he said simply. The widow stared at the bowl. The liquid shimmered in the firelight, pieces of vegetables floating inside. It wasn't much, but to her it looked like a feast. She lifted the spoon with trembling hands, afraid it might spill. Her first taste burned her tongue, but she didn't care. The warmth spread through her chest down to her empty stomach. Her eyes closed for a moment and she almost cried. For so long she had eaten scraps cold and bitter. But this was food made with care, with love. The little girl grinned at her. "See? I told you Daddy makes the best soup." The widow opened her eyes, her lips trembling with a small smile she hadn't felt in years. She nodded. "Yes, it's good." The father said nothing. He ate slowly, his gaze moving between his daughter and the widow. His face was calm, but his eyes revealed the storm of questions inside him. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had fate placed her in his daughter's path? The silence grew heavy, broken only by the clink of spoons against bowls. Finally, the widow whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was soft but carried weight. The man looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You needed it," he said. The girl laughed suddenly, her spoon dripping stew onto the table. "See, Daddy? I was right. She likes it here. She should stay." The widow's face flushed. Her hands tightened around the bowl. I cannot stay," she murmured quickly. "I am only here for this meal. Nothing more." But the girl shook her head stubbornly. "No, you're nice. And Daddy's lonely. You should marry him." The widow gasped, choking slightly on her stew. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to hide, to disappear, but the man's deep sigh cut through the air. "Lena," he said firmly, though his voice remained gentle. "Enough of that." The girl pouted but obeyed, stabbing her spoon into the stew dramatically. The widow lowered her gaze. Shame filled her, but also a strange warmth she couldn't explain. The child's words were foolish, innocent, but they stirred something in her heart she had buried long ago. As the bowls emptied, the widow felt strength return to her body. Her hands no longer shook as much. The warmth of the food lingered in her chest, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel completely hollow. The man stood, collecting the empty bowls. His movements were steady, practiced like someone used to doing everything alone. The girl hummed a tune, swinging her legs happily. The widow sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She wanted to speak, to thank him again, to explain her story, but fear held her tongue. Would he believe her? Would he turn her away once he knew she had nothing to give? The man glanced at her once more as he placed the bowls in a small basin. His eyes lingered just long enough to make her heart race. Then he turned away as if deciding it was too soon for words. The fire crackled softly. The girl yawned, leaning against her father's side. The widow realized something shocking. She did not want to leave. For the first time since the war, she felt the faint outline of a home, not hers, not yet, but something she could almost touch. And deep inside her, a dangerous hope whispered, maybe this is not just a meal. Maybe this is the beginning of something more. The next morning, the alien widow woke before the sun. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The smell of ashes from the fire, the soft breathing of the little girl asleep in the next room, and the sound of a man moving quietly in the kitchen. It all felt like a dream. Then the truth settled in. She was still inside their home. She had eaten a warm meal last night. She had slept under a roof, not in the freezing streets. It felt unreal. Her first thought was to leave. She could not stay. Humans did not trust aliens. They would only whisper, only stare. She had no right to bring trouble into this man's life. But as she rose to gather her things, the little girl stirred, opened her sleepy eyes and smiled. "You didn't go," the child whispered happily. "I was scared you would." The widow froze. Those words pierced her heart. She lowered her head and sat back down. I was going to," she admitted softly. The girl shook her head, her braids messy. "No, you belong here." The widow had no answer. The days passed slowly. At first, the widow kept her distance. She stayed quiet, never asking for more than food, never looking directly into the man's eyes. But the little girl's laughter filled the silence like sunlight filling a dark room. The girl, Lena, followed her everywhere. She asked endless questions about her glowing eyes, her home planet, even her strange accent when she spoke human words. The widow tried to push her away gently, but the child's warmth was too strong. Slowly she found herself answering. Slowly she found herself smiling. The man watched silently. He was cautious but not unkind. He worked long hours, fixing broken machines for the colony. He carried heavy supplies, cooked meals, and cared for his daughter with quiet strength. He never complained, never asked the widow to leave, but he also never said she could stay. One evening, as the fire burned low, the widow noticed something. The man's hands were rough and scarred, his shoulders bent with exhaustion. He worked harder than anyone she had ever known. Yet when his daughter laughed, his eyes softened in a way that reminded her of her lost mate. It startled her. Soon she began to help. At first, it was small things, sweeping the floor, mending the little girl's clothes, chopping vegetables. The man did not stop her. He only watched, silent but thoughtful. One night after she prepared a simple meal, Lena clapped her hands with delight. "See, Daddy? She's helping. She's already part of us." The widow's heart raced. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the man spoke first. "Don't say things like that, Lena," he said gently. "She's our guest." The word guest stung. The widow lowered her eyes. She reminded herself that this was temporary, and yet, part of her wished it wasn't. The neighbors noticed. Whispers spread in the marketplace. Humans looked at the man differently now, some with pity, some with disgust. "Why is he letting that alien stay with him?" they murmured. "What example is he setting for his child?" The widow heard the whispers when she went outside. She felt the stares like knives in her back. But when she returned to the little house, Lena's laughter drowned it all out. One night, she almost told him she should leave. She was afraid her presence would bring him shame. But when she looked at his tired face, when she saw Lena resting peacefully in his arms, the words died. For the first time in years, she felt needed. A small moment changed everything. The girl fell while playing outside, scraping her knee badly. She cried loudly, tears streaming down her face. The widow rushed forward without thinking, scooping the child into her arms. "Hush," she whispered, pressing her hand gently against the wound. A faint glow spread from her skin, healing the scrape little by little. Lena gasped through her tears. "You're magic." The widow shook her head, her voice breaking. "No, child. Just different." The man had seen it too. He approached, worry in his eyes, but also something else, something softer. Gratitude. "She trusts you," he said quietly. The widow's throat tightened. She looked at the girl clinging to her, refusing to let go, and for the first time she dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. The nights grew warmer with laughter. The meals became fuller, not just with food but with conversation. Slowly, the silence between the widow and the man lessened. They spoke little, but when their eyes met, there was no hostility anymore. Only quiet understanding. The little girl was right. They were all lonely, but together they weren't anymore. The widow knew she was still a stranger. She knew the world outside their door would never accept her. But in this small home, with this man and his child, something had begun to grow. It wasn't just kindness anymore. It was family. The days had turned into weeks, and weeks into a quiet rhythm of life. The alien widow still felt like a guest, yet the little house no longer felt strange. She woke each morning to the sound of the little girl's laughter, the smell of firewood, and the man's steady footsteps as he prepared for another long day of work. But in her heart, she knew it could not last. Every time she helped prepare meals, every time she tucked Lena into bed, she reminded herself this was not her home. She was only a shadow passing through. Still, her heart whispered something dangerous. What if it could be? One evening, the air outside was heavy with the scent of rain. The wind howled softly against the walls and the fire crackled inside. The little girl sat on the floor playing with scraps of cloth, pretending they were dolls. Her laughter echoed through the small house like bells. The widow sat at the table, her hands folded in her lap, while the man stirred a pot over the fire. His shoulders were bent with exhaustion, but his movements were calm, steady. She watched him quietly. The firelight touched his face, and she saw the same tired loneliness she carried within herself. "Daddy," the little girl said suddenly, breaking the silence. She held up her makeshift dolls. "Can she stay forever?"
"Please," the widow froze.
Her heart pounded. The man looked at his daughter, sighing softly. "Lena." But the girl cut him off, her voice bright with innocence. "No, listen. If she stays, I won't be lonely anymore. And you won't be lonely anymore either. She's already like family. So can she be my mom?" The widow's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes lowered, shame burning her cheeks. She whispered, "Child, don't." But the girl's eyes sparkled with determination. "Why not? She's kind. She takes care of me. She makes the house warm." Then, with a mischievous grin, the girl said the words that made the widow's world stop. "Daddy, marry her." The room fell into silence. The only sound was the crackling fire and the steady beat of rain against the roof. The widow's hand shook. She wanted to protest, to tell the girl she was foolish. She wanted to run before rejection crushed her heart. But her feet were heavy, her chest tight. The man set down the spoon slowly. He turned to face them, his eyes serious, his jaw tense. He looked at his daughter, then at the widow. His gaze lingered on her longer than ever before. The widow lowered her head, unable to meet his eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "She does not understand. I will leave." "Stay," he interrupted firmly. Her head lifted in shock. The man's voice was steady, but softer than she had ever heard it. "You don't have to leave." The widow's lips parted, but no words came. He walked closer, kneeling down to his daughter first. He brushed a hand through her messy braids. "Lena, marriage isn't something we decide in a game. It's not that simple, but Daddy..." "Hush," he said gently. Then he stood, turning to face the widow again. His eyes held no anger, only something deeper, something she hadn't seen in anyone's eyes since the war. "Understanding. You've given my daughter something I could not," he said quietly. "Her laughter came back because of you. She trusts you and..." His words faltered for a moment. "So do I." The widow's heart raced. "You trust me?" she whispered, as if the words were too heavy to believe. The man nodded slowly. "You came to us broken, but you've only brought light into this house. I cannot ignore that." The widow felt tears sting her eyes. Her voice cracked. "But I have nothing to give. No home, no wealth, no future. Only scars." The man's gaze softened. "Then we are the same. I've been living with nothing but scars, too." The firelight flickered between them. For the first time, she dared to hold his gaze, and what she saw made her chest ache. A man who carried the same loneliness, the same weight of loss. He took a breath, his voice firm yet tender. "If you want, you are not just a guest anymore. You are part of this home." The widow's tears finally fell. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came. She felt the little girl's small arms wrap around her waist, hugging her tightly. "See?" Lena said proudly. "I told you. Now we can be family." The widow laughed through her tears, a sound broken but filled with relief. She looked at the man again, her heart burning with a hope she had long buried. "Yes," she whispered. "If you truly mean it, I will stay." The man nodded once, his lips curving into the faintest of smiles. It wasn't a proposal in the way stories told it, with rings or grand speeches. It was something simpler, something stronger, an unspoken promise, born from shared pain and new hope. The storm raged outside, but inside the little house, the widow felt something she had thought lost forever. She felt love stirring again. The storm had passed by morning. The air outside was fresh, the streets wet with rain, and the sky held a faint glow of sunlight breaking through gray clouds. Inside the little house, the widow sat quietly at the table, her hands wrapped around a warm cup. She had not left. The thought filled her chest with both fear and peace. For years she had lived as a shadow, hungry, forgotten, unseen. But now in this home, she had been given something more powerful than food or shelter. She had been given a chance to belong. The little girl, Lena, bounced into the room with energy only children carried. Her braids were messy, her smile wide. She ran straight to the widow and climbed into her lap as if she had always belonged there. "You stayed," Lena said happily, pressing her small hands against the widow's arms. "I knew you would." The widow's heart softened. She held the child gently, her thin arms trembling. "Yes," she whispered. "I stayed." The man entered the room then, his boots damp from stepping outside to fetch water. His eyes landed on them, and for the first time his expression wasn't guarded. He looked tired still, but there was something new, something lighter. "Breakfast," he said simply, setting a loaf of bread on the table. They ate together, and for the first time silence was not heavy. It was comfortable. The clink of spoons, the laughter of the little girl, and the warmth of the fire wove around them like threads binding them together. But outside, the whispers had grown louder. Neighbors had seen the widow enter and never leave. Some called it shameful, others foolish. Humans distrusted what they didn't understand, and an alien living under a human roof was something they didn't want to accept. The widow heard it when she went to fetch water, saw it in their stares at the market. Her heart ached. She didn't want her presence to bring trouble to the man and his daughter. That night she almost gathered her things again. She stood by the door, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, her eyes wet with tears. She whispered to herself, "Better to leave before I destroy what little peace they have." But before she could open the door, a voice stopped her. "Don't," the man said from behind her. She froze. Slowly she turned. His face was calm, but his eyes carried weight. "You think leaving will protect us," he said. "But you're wrong. My daughter has already chosen you. And so have I." Her throat tightened. "But the others—" "Let them whisper," he interrupted. "We know the truth. That is enough." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then, for the first time since the war had taken everything from her, the widow smiled without shame. It was small, fragile, but real. Days turned into weeks again, and life inside the house changed. The widow no longer sat apart during meals. She laughed when Lena played tricks. She helped the man repair broken tools, and she told stories of her people under the stars at night. Lena would often curl up beside her, eyes wide with wonder, asking endless questions. "What was your world like? Did you have rivers that glowed? Did the stars sing like you say?" The widow would smile sadly. "Yes, child, once, but it is gone now." And Lena would hold her hand tightly, whispering, "Then you can share ours instead." The man listened quietly during those nights, his face hidden in the shadows, but his eyes were soft. He no longer looked at her like a stranger. He looked at her like someone who belonged. One evening, as the fire burned low, Lena fell asleep in her chair, her head resting on the table. The widow gently lifted her and laid her in her small bed. When she returned, the man was waiting, standing by the fire. Their eyes met in the flickering light. "You've changed this house," he said quietly. The widow shook her head. "No, your daughter changed me." The man's lips curved slightly. "Maybe she changed us both." They stood in silence, the fire warming their faces. Then slowly, carefully, he reached out his hand. The widow hesitated only a moment before placing hers in his. His touch was rough, scarred from years of labor, but steady. Hers was thin and trembling, but filled with quiet strength. No more words were needed. In that moment, they both understood. They were no longer two broken souls. They were something new, something whole. The next morning, Lena woke early and ran to them with excitement. "Did you decide?" she asked with a wide grin. The man raised an eyebrow. "Decide what?"
Are we family now?
she asked. "Forever?" The widow knelt, her eyes filled with tears she no longer hid. She held the girl close. "Yes, child," she whispered. "Forever." The little girl squealed with joy, hugging them both. And just like that, the word family no longer felt like a dream. It was real. The world outside might never understand. Whispers might never fade. But inside that little house, they had built something stronger than fear, stronger than loss, stronger than species. They had built love. And for the widow, once hungry, once forgotten, it was more than enough.